Hi, my name is Dustin Messer. I'm a priest at All Saints Dallas. This fall, we have a course that I want to invite you to. It's called Reforming Faith. Over the past many years, we've always run an Alpha course, which is a program for folks who are interested in following Jesus but have questions. Over the many years, I've done Alpha. I've collected those questions and obstacles people name as to what keeps them from following Jesus. It's really interesting. I feel like the questions we used to get had to do with, is there really a God? Is the Bible really true? Things like that. But at least in Dallas, the questions we've been receiving more and more have to do not so much with Jesus's truthfulness or validity, but with the church. The questions we've received are things like, why does the church care what we do with our bodies? Why is the church so interested in politics? And is there a real Christian way to live in the world as a citizen? How do we process church hurt? We've been abused or wounded or know someone who has by the church. How do I process my own suffering? These are big questions, and we have a program this fall to address those, both for people who are unchurched, for folks who are dechurched, and for Christians who are very happy in their church but want to think more thoughtfully about how to process these big questions that our neighbors are asking. When we thought of this course, the very first person I knew we wanted to talk in this was the Reverend Dr. Chris Myers, who joins me right now. Chris, how's it going?
Hello. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing very well. You are going to talk with us about a subject you have written about for Christianity Today on how to trust a Jesus who left us a church that wounds us. My first question is this: we've been wounded by institutions before, clubs, schools, you name it, and yet when the church causes a wound, it tends to hit us to the quick in a different way than if the Boy Scouts or something like that sins against us. Why do
hmm
you think that is?
Yeah, I think part of it is um, actually a good thing is that we hold the church to a higher standard, um, in the sense that, like, well, if this is Christ's body and this is the institution that he left us to extend his mission in the world, shouldn't it be different in the church? And I think there's a natural question that comes with that. I think, too, why it hurts so much is because it causes so much cognitive dissonance, um, because of that. If we have any kind of theological or biblical understanding of the church as the body of Christ, the bride of Christ, the fact that that body could wound itself is very hard to wrap our minds around. And I liken it maybe to the experience of people who have autoimmune disorders, because the idea that your own immune system would treat your own body as an enemy is a very difficult concept to wrap our mind around, because it's doing the actual opposite thing that it's meant to do. It's not protecting you, it's attacking you. So I think one is, like I said, it's like that higher standard. We should hold the church to some kind of standard that's beyond just, another institution. But because there is that standard, when there is pain and wounding or abuse, that comes, I think it causes an enormous amount of cognitive dissonance, because you're trying to be reconciled to the thing that hurt you. And how
Mm.
do you do that? And it's really hard, and it looks different for different people, um, because even the term church hurt is so big and encompasses so many things.
Yeah. I have a neighbor whose son is the same age as my daughter, and actually I didn't plan on saying this, but his son, they're both like, 2.5, and his son speaks three languages. And he was telling me this other day, his son speaks three languages, and my daughter was sitting in a corner picking her nose, playing with rocks. And I was like, Penny, I feel like I'm really falling behind here. She speaks one language and is still learning that, but he and I were talking about faith, just he knew what I do for a living. And I asked him if he had any faith, and it was really interesting because he said, "Oh yeah, I'm a Christian for sure." And I said, "Where do you go to church?" Which is just a question that kind of almost naturally follows to that one. And he said, "Oh, I'm not. Church isn't for me." Someone who had the category of a Jesus follower, but not a part of a church, really wouldn't have been something imaginable, I don't think, in the first few centuries of
Yeah.
the church. And yet, I know you have neighbors who are in that exact same position. What do you think has led to just this mass exodus from the church and disenchantment from the church for those watching this or our neighbors?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the idea that it would be an unthinkable thought to have a churchless Christianity at different times during church history is worth considering why that is. And if there's a nugget for us there in terms of how we make our way back. Because I think part of what we have to be honest about is what not just what the one theologian calls this blueprint ecclesiology, or ecclesiology is the theology of the church. And we have this idea that there's this perfect blueprint. And then when we map it over our actual experience, there's this huge disconnect. Um, but on one level, like the church has always talked about the church as it will be, and the church as it is, and that there's this gap between the two. Um, and that if we see ourselves as the baptized who have been united to Christ and his church, um, then part of the thing that we have to do is say, okay, I'm the baptized. It's no light thing for me to walk away
Mm,
from the body that I've been joined to by baptism. So I think one reason that maybe there is confusion around this question is because we've lost some of what it means just to be incorporated. And I use that word kind of playfully in both ways. Like we think of a corporation as almost like a faceless entity, and
mhm.
yet the body of Christ, his corpus, we are incorporated into it. We are united to it, and it's a much more organic picture. And I think part of what you're saying is people have had this negative experience of the corporate model of church, and they have a gut level instinct that there's an organic body that they're supposed to be part of.
Mm,
And the disconnect between those two feels maybe untenable sometimes.
yeah, yeah. And the obstacles are the things that perhaps alienate one from the body of Christ. Sometimes, look, it's the teaching of Jesus. I mean, he says to the rich young ruler, sell everything and follow me. Oftentimes, it is the cross, it's the Lent that keeps us from pursuing the resurrection. No doubt. I mean, the Bible's full of that. But also, I think there are times where the church has, as you said, become incongruent with its mission and vocation and identity with Jesus. And actually, the things folks deconstruct, or the thing that repels our neighbors actually isn't inherent to the gospel, and in fact
Mm-hmm.
is antithetical to the gospel. We developed a course. It's 6 weeks long. There will be a 25-minute talk, a dinner together. We believe hospitality essential in everything we do. We'll provide dinner, and then we'll have table discussion where, with 8 folks who you'll become friends with over the 6 weeks, Lord willing, we'll process really hard teachings. We'll acknowledge the way the church has inaccurately or ungracefully represented these teachings, and then we'll appeal to the teachings of Jesus and the tradition of the church to give, hopefully, a more true, good, and beautiful vision for these things. So some of these topics are, as I said, politics, sexual ethics, church hurt, suffering. This is the delicate china of life, and churches are often reticent to talk about the obstacles that keep our neighbors from coming to church, or said differently, we're reticent to talk about the enchanted things of faith, and not talking about them, we see people become disenchanted. So we're going to talk about these things around a table. Chris, why do you think it's important to, as our good Bishop Philip Jones says, put the skunks on the table and acknowledge pain and hard things?
I think, I mean, to hit the topic of the church, every institution needs a mode of self-criticism, even the church.
Mhm.
And we see it in the scriptures that even within the covenant community of Israel, God raises up prophets. He raises up people who can voice, hey, this is not the way that it's supposed to be. Um, which actually is very encouraging because it means like we're not going to get it perfect, but if we silence all criticism, we don't have a mode to actually have conversation around, well, what is the standard and how are we falling short of it? Um, then we're going to lose all credibility. So the idea that I could have conversation, shared conversation around a shared topic in the context of Christian community is just a small step towards that bigger conversation that I think our culture is having about it. But it's very difficult to have the conversation up here without it being um, sometimes hostile, sometimes very heated. But when I'm seated across from another person and I've shared a meal with them, it's much harder to polarize.
Mm.
You have to consider someone else's viewpoint. You have to consider your response to them in light of their viewpoint. And being people who believe in the spirit being at work within people, there's something about having shared conversation that can move us all forward towards healing or to deeper understanding. So I think that's one reason that this format can be really helpful. We did something similar in the spring at St. Bart's, where we had we used kind of the alpha format like you guys are doing to go through a book that hit some of these big topics. And we found exactly what I'm describing is someone who we had people who were able to disagree without being disagreeable.
Yeah.
That's kind of one of what was one of our watch phrases. Can you disagree without being disagreeable? And that's kind of a superpower, but it's a lot easier when the food is good, the drink is good, the company is good, and the person is right in front of you, and you have to like look them in the eye.
Blood and honey makes even difficult conversations a little easier. We'll have blood and honey and Shiner and wine and good food this fall. Yeah, what y'all did at St. Bart's was real influential as I was thinking about this, just seeing people respond not to the avoidance of those things that had perhaps alienated them, but acknowledging them. So if you're watching this and you're interested in this course, it starts October 9th. It's every Wednesday at 7 p.m., 7 to 8:30. We will always end on time. We know it's a school night. We think this will be a really worthwhile and valuable use of your time, whether you're churched and want to think about how we can process these topics wisely, or whether you perhaps have been wounded by the church and these questions aren't ephemeral or theoretical to you, but deeply personal. We would love to invite you. There's a link below to register. We do have to cap the course to allow for the sort of hospitality that we want to provide. So I would encourage you to register sooner rather than later. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is dustin@ascdallas.org. Reverend Dr. Chris Myers, thank you for
It's a
telling
pleasure.
about this course, and thank you for watching. Go in peace.